Welcome back to the Peerless Members Only video group. I am Caitie North, and today we're going to be painting bugs, which are so fun. We're gonna do beetles today. I absolutely love how they have that shimmer iridescent factor, and we're gonna be playing around with some of Peerless's metallics. So I hope you enjoy this tutorial, and if you try it at home, make sure to tag us. Let's get started.
Alright, so we're going to jump right in, and the first thing we're going to do is transfer our image onto our watercolor paper. So all I've done is used my reference photo and made an outline, and now that the outline is nice and crisp, I'm going to transfer it to my watercolor paper with a light box, or you can use a well-lit window during the day, obviously. You could put it in the window, and then the light on the backside will kind of shine through your reference. This is a great way to do it if you aren't comfortable drawing and you're also trying to get something that looks more realistic too. So don't be afraid of using, the little tricks of the trade. And if you're not comfortable drawing, you could always trace it. And it's a quick and effective way to get going. And so for this one, we're actually going to do it a little bit different. I'm going to hold this image up in the right-hand corner of my reference photo the entire time, just because there's not a lot of technical painting to this, but I wanted to show you how I add the layers to create the realistic beetle like it is in the photo. So when you're tracing something like this, you're not just tracing like the outline of the body and the wing, but you're also tracing the different areas of where the light is hit differently, and you're going to be placing the different colors. So you can see on my reference photo how I've highlighted all of where those bright neon green areas are, and then I've separated the kind of areas where it's darker, and that will give you just those guidelines that when you go down to let your painting, like to do your painting, you know where those different colors are supposed to be. And even though if like in the middle there where it's like kind of orangish to reddish to like that really, really deep red or black, all of those are going to be blended into one color with the watercolors in some areas, but knowing where those start and stop, where you want those extra pack of pigment and extra like darker tones to be, helps a lot when you want to make this a realistic painting. Alright, so now that you have your outline finished and it's nice and crisp and clean and it looks like a really awesome coloring book page, we're gonna kind of treat it like it is a coloring book. So we're going to be trying to get the brightest green, which I'm using the light green, and all these colors are just straight from the complete edition, and I'm just going straight from the pack onto the page. And so I'm getting their like purest, darkest, and brightest kind of pigment tones. So what you're doing is you're going to be following it along with your beetle in your reference photo right out of the coloring pack. So we're not adding a ton of colors to a color palette or mixing on the color palette, but we're going to be mixing on the page. And the thing I want you to remember, I guess like the most important part, is as we're following it along from a reference photo, if there is a complementary color next to a complementary color, you can't add those together while they're still wet, otherwise they'll bleed together. So that's why I'm going to go all the way around the edge of this beetle with this lime green color, is because I want that to stay the truest and brightest and pack all of that punch of that color. And I'm not going to put down another color next to it until it's completely dry, because I want it to stay vibrant, and I don't want it dulled down by the yellow or the orangey, more of the orange. The yellow would look good. The orange, that would kind of mute it into more of a neutral green or a darker kind of color. So if that makes sense, right here you can kind of mix the green and the yellow, because those are what gives you kind of that limey, not iridescent, like the neon kind of color. You can mix the areas where the green and the yellow mix together, but you want to wait for it to dry before you do anything next to that lime green if it is an orange or a red. All right, so once you have all of your lime green put down, now is time to start kind of filling in a little bit more of those yellow and oranges to reds. And you can see that I've kind of put a little bit of a barrier of paint, a barrier of white paper, so blank paper, between the green and the yellow. That's just because the green hasn't completely dried yet, and I don't want any of this orangey colors that I put next to it going to bleed into my green. So I have that little buffer line just to kind of stay away from the green until I know it's 100% dry. And then, so what makes this beetle so cool and so realistic is that it's so vibrant in these colors and how they blend together. But to get some of these vibrant colors, sometimes you have to build them, and you have to build them with layers because water is naturally transparent. And if you put a little bit too much water, it's very light and transparent, which most watercolors I feel like are just so soft and beautiful, and there's like an elegance to them. I absolutely love packing in all of the color as possible, and Peerless is one of the most vibrant and intense pigmented watercolors that I've used. So it's amazing. You can get obviously as bright as this pigment right away, but then you can also let each layer dry, and then it'll kind of soften a little bit, but then you're adding those pigments back again to make a brighter or richer, more intense. And so for some of these areas, I want the yellow and the red to blend together. Again, we're using the red right out of, I think it's the crimson in there. And then the brilliant yellow straight out of the complete edition. And I'm going to kind of blend them into that yellow while it's still wet. But I want there to be a lot of those pigments in there because the more of that yellow and the orange together as they're mixing are very, very vibrant. And then once you get all of your kind of like mid-tone reds in there, then we're going to wait for it to dry, and then we're going to come back again and do those darker tones. All right, so now we have our lime green edging and then our mid-tone kind of colors that we're gonna call the orangey, red, and yellow kind of bleeding of the colors. And then now we're just gonna go fill around all the rest of our little antennae and arms of our, I guess, little legs and arms of our beetle. And we're just gonna fill that in with the light green. And we will do a second color there to kind of add some dimension too, but we're laying down that first layer of lime green. All right, so now that we have our base color for our entire beetle done, now it is time to start thinking about our second layer. So again, looking at our reference photo, I'm like, oh, this color is kind of cool. It's kind of like a brownish, kind of weird muted color, but it's very simple. I know how to get it because I'm mixing those orange colors with those green colors, but it's gonna be just slightly a little bit more of that orange, and you're just gonna kind of pick it around on the page, and it depends on what kind of paper you're using too. Sometimes you're able to mix on the page a little bit easier if you have a little bit less expensive, like a lower quality paper. Sometimes it'll kind of ball up a little bit too, so be careful with that. But right now I'm just trying to shift some of those colors on the page, and instead of just making a puddle of paint again, I'm just adding a little bit of the complementary color or whatever colored tone I want to shift it in. So like that little area, I wanted to be a little bit more yellow, where it's kind of connecting to the top of the beetle. I wanted it to kind of be that more muted kind of green to reddish, which is kind of a cool color. And then just kind of go around looking at your reference photo, and then you're just kind of picking out some of those details. And so one thing that I would say when you're working on a realistic painting, you're like, that's a really weird spot to put that color, or like that's a really weird area to make it so dark. But then when you're finished with it and you take a step back and you do a comparison and the side by side, it's all of those weird shadows and light sources and things that kind of like make weird areas pop out that just naturally your brain doesn't want to do it. But when you step back when it's finished, you're like, oh, that looks really cool. Like that is where it is supposed to be. So having those guidelines and kind of going around and, you know, understanding that sometimes when your brain doesn't want you to paint that area, but you're like, oh, but that's my guideline, I am supposed to do that. And you're just kind of going right back and forth between your beetle reference and then that. Those little things kind of help you make it look more realistic. So going around, I wanted to add a little bit of an outline, but I didn't want it to do completely black yet. So I'm shifting the green with a little bit of the sky blue. And that's just going to help kind of pop out that lime green a little bit better. And then I think I go through and I outline all of the little arms and legs. All right, so I feel like this is the fun part. I feel like this is what kind of makes it take more shape a little bit, is we're going to be adding our black. So the adding of the black, again, it's the same thing. You're following your guidelines exactly like you drew them. So if you have a little edge there and you're like, oh, that's exactly where that little black line goes. And this is kind of what I was saying before. Sometimes it feels a little weird putting such a dark color right in the middle of your painting, and it's not necessarily outlining an area, but that's the way that the reference photo looks. That trust the process. And when you're adding those things, that's what makes it, that gives it the character and make it, you know, super unique and look like your reference photo. So yeah, going around, we're going to be adding all of our black lines. And then I was looking at the legs a little bit too. So they are significantly darker, which helps kind of pop that body up. So once you kind of add them, all the black on your body of your beetle, you're going to add some on the legs as well. All right, so the next part is where I'm kind of, is still on that same kind of like guideline of color shifting. So what I'm doing is my paintbrush is actually completely dry when I started that little area. And what I'm doing is just saturating the color next to the black area that I just want to shift. And I'm just kind of pulling it down so that black just gets kind of bled through and doesn't have such a harsh line, but it has a little bit of that softer kind of pulling of the paint towards the other side of the beetle leg or shell, the beetle shell. So some of those areas that you can kind of shift that way, that's how I did that. And then of course, my absolute favorite, I feel like Peerless just makes the most beautiful shiny gold like ever, and it's just so cool because this beetle is obviously shiny and iridescent and crazy and amazing, and you've added all of those the highlights and the color shift. But if you were to turn this beetle, it would shift color, and you would see the areas that kind of look yellow and kind of red. If you switch it this way, it's going to look yellow or green or even kind of purple sometimes. Like, it's totally crazy. So I wanted to give some kind of shift and light play with it. And so the gold in the Peerless sheets just work perfectly. So you'll be able to see at the end in about a minute when you turn the paper and you get all of those light reflecting off of the gold, it just comes to life. And I feel like it just makes such a beautiful addition to this more realistic style of painting. But then there's also that kind of like wow factor of using the Peerless metallics. All right, and here is the completed beetle and how it shimmers when you tilt the page. Oh, I just love it. I love beetles and I love bugs, and I love the Peerless metallic paints so much.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. And if you do this, make sure to tag us. We would love to see your paintings. We will see you next time.